Welcome to the 490th episode of the Jami Dulaney Plant-Based Wellness Podcast. My name is Jami Dulaney, and I'm your host. I'm a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete living in Southwest Florida. There's just a little hint of cooler air once in a while. But for the most part, I've had some long runs, which are good things, but some really hot long runs. The plan is to go back to the scene of the crime at Colt Creek State Park and run a loop of the long haul in the middle of September, and then on to the Rattler for a 50K. So all that's still in place, and just working up the mileage as I can. Still doing the strength training, keeping it at 3 days a week with Coach Nathan. Again, we talked about on the podcast last week that Nathan is now offering strength training programs through our practice, both with email content and Zoom interviews. So if you have some interest in that, look at our website. You can also email Nathan at nathan@drdulaney.com. It's Nathan at Dr. Dulaney spelled out. But anyway, I'm doing my training with him, so I'm starting a new cycle. So I went through 8 weeks of initial training, and now I'm going to do another 8 weeks. He's added some new exercises, including pizza pies and pale-off presses for me. So you can Google what those are if you want to know. But there's been some fun challenges as far as working different muscle groups, working on my lower legs and calves to try to get them stronger, and of course, glutes and upper legs and lower back, the whole 9 yards. So far, so good. Things are getting good. I'm increasing my weight, starting to like it a little bit. I mean, a lot. No, I actually am enjoying it, and I can see the efforts when I'm running. So that's the biggest thing that I'm happy about. And I'm also not experiencing what I have feared in the past, that lifting weights will impair my ability to get a good run in because of soreness or something. So that's not happening. So he's done a great job programming for me, and all is well. It seems like a common theme from this podcast is to look at how allopathic medicine focuses more on treating the numbers, but really not the cause, the root cause, or perhaps even look at outcomes being improved survival, improved quality of life. But again, worried more about numbers, and publications are posted based on, the numbers got better and you should do this or take this or have this done, but it doesn't really translate into outcomes. You would think common sense wise that if your numbers got better, your life would be better, but often that doesn't happen, and mainly that doesn't happen because of potential side effects. I got an email question sometime back from one of the listeners asking me to go over Lp(a), and that is, often in the news and a fear because it is very much dictated by genetics for the most part, what that number might be. If you look back at people that had heart attacks, there tend to be elevated Lp(a). There's not much in the way as far as treatment for Lp(a) that doesn't have other side effects. So people are worried about it, and the question is, should you have it checked, shouldn't you have it checked, and how often should you have it checked? Lp(a) is a lot like regular old LDL, or low-density lipoprotein, but a little bit different in that some of the factors may be associated with increased tendency towards inflammation or worsening cardiovascular outcomes associated with inflammation and how inflammation is regulated, as well as increased risk of clotting. So that may be one of the mechanisms that people with Lp(a) tend to have cardiac events. There's no real consensus on the threshold at which, oh my goodness, this is an awful number, you're in deep trouble, versus it's elevated. Typically, most U.S. labs target a level greater than 50 or less than 30. It really doesn't change much over a 5-year period, and so most countries, other than the United States, people have it checked maybe once to determine if they want to see whether they have an Lp(a) elevation, but there's no reason to check it on an every 6-month basis like you might have lipids checked if you were actually changing your lifestyle modification. One is probably more likely to have a C-reactive protein, looking at inflammation, specifically cardiac inflammation, as kind of a marker. So Lp(a) and elevated CRP, that again, inflammatory things you can target versus Lp(a). 70 to 75% of the population have low Lp(a), so it's not something that affects people like diabetes does. It does tend to be genetic. Statin therapy might actually increase Lp(a) a little bit. Zetia, which is another another cholesterol medicine, may lower it a little bit, but again, not lower the number, but it's not been tied to improved outcomes. Niacin is a B vitamin that has been shown to lower Lp(a) some, but the side effects tend to outweigh the benefits. There is an injectable cholesterol medication called PCSK9 that people get to lower their LDL markedly. It does have some effect on Lp(a), but again, there has been no mortality benefit to date associated with taking that very expensive $10,000 a year drug. Large meta-analysis looking at multiple studies of Lp(a). There was one that looked at 43 studies, 950,000 plus people, looking at all-cause mortality and cardiovascular mortality. The numbers difference, absolute number 12 versus 19, cardiovascular disease death if your Lp(a) is higher. All-cause mortality, there wasn't association. So if your Lp(a) is elevated, it may affect your cardiac, the risk of cardiac disease and or mortality, but not overall mortality. It doesn't appear to increase in a linear fashion, but we're talking somewhere about a 15 to 30% overall suggested increased risk of events in people that have very high Lp(a)s compared to very low Lp(a)s, and that is not taking into account any other cardiovascular risk factors. I think Dr. Esselstyn has put it best when he said it's like having a grenade. You can keep a hand grenade in your closet, but as long as you don't pull the pin, everything's okay, and that tends to be so. Asians tend to have a little bit worse prognosis they have very high Lp(a)s. On the other hand, when you look at the very large nurses health study in Lp(a), there was no associated with cardiovascular heart disease. That may be because that population, anybody is participating in that, tends to have a healthier lifestyle, so they may not have the comorbidities that, again, pull the pin on that hand grenade. Comorbidities such as liver disease, kidney disease, inflammatory conditions can, again, make having an Lp(a) a little bit more dangerous. 3.5 times, again, the most high Lp(a) number, about a 14% increase in cardiovascular deaths. All comers, not controlling for risk factors. So the reality, it's probably more of a marker for inflammation or potential problems when people have inflammatory type conditions. A very prominent inflammatory state in this country is obesity, and having an elevated BMI is strongly associated with increased inflammation, increased C-reactive protein. So that is one of the biggest prophylactic things you can do to decrease your risk from having a genetic elevation of your Lp(a). Nobody talks about that, by the way. There was an Italian study looking at 80 and 90-year-olds with Lp(a), and they looked at people that were living alone versus people that were disabled, compared them to a control group, And the reality of it is there was no real difference in LP little a and overall mortality and outcome. So again, as far as longevity, it's really what other risk factors you have along with LP little a. So if you have a very strong family history, parents and grandparents die in their 40s and 50s of heart disease, I have that, then you may have an elevated risk, or you may have an elevated LP little a as a genetic marker. There are multiple genetic markers for cardiovascular disease that are not LP little a that interact in ways that we do not understand. So, there are therapies out there being tested to genetically modify people with, do things to genetically modify the expression of LP little a. We don't know how other things interact. So at this stage in the game, playing with fire a little bit in my point of view, better to control your risk factors. And again, I don't think LP little a is something to be extremely worried about. It goes back to, again, maintaining your overall health and wellness, decreasing inflammation is going to be the key to your overall cardiovascular health. In the old days, a study was done at a university, and most of the time it was done in one location, and people weren't paid to enroll people, and there was oversight committees looking at the ethics around the study, and the lead researcher collected the results and interpreted them and wrote the paper and submitted it for publication. Now, there are various studies that are done with certainly pharmaceutical backing, other investigational companies that pay to do research, and people enter people in studies, and everything, the waters get muddied and the results come in, and then a professional science writer is utilized to write up the data for potential publication in a variety of different journals that may or may not be widely scrutinized. And one such study was recently put out looking at estrogen replacement and improvement in cardiovascular risk, such as HDL, which is the good cholesterol, might go up a little bit, the LDL might go down a little bit, and even LP little a might go down a little bit. But this was an observational study. They did not look at heart attacks, cardiovascular disease, deaths, and the largest study looking at estrogen replacement was stopped because of increased clotting and heart attacks in women. There was also a study in Journal of Clinical Oncology that looked at increased risk of ovarian cancer and mortality from ovarian cancer, showing that, again, estrogen replacement, even with estrogen and progesterone, increased ovarian cancer and ovarian cancer mortality. So you have two large studies looking at, again, increased risk, but you have this little study showing, your cholesterol might get better, and it's a reason to take estrogen replacement therapy. That is not the case in most instances. Again, outweigh the risk versus benefits. In an individual setting, it's certainly not come one, come all, or a protocol, so to speak. Nutrition would be a much safer way to lower your cardiovascular risk and also lower your ovarian cancer risk. And as far as menopausal symptoms such as flushing, hot flashes, mood changes, those are also all improved with risk factor modifications such as normalization of body mass index, exercise, and soy products. So there's multiple things that a person can do without taking a medication to improve symptoms without the risk of increased mortality. I recently became a member of AARP, not because of anything other than I thought maybe I'd get a better hotel rate or a better rental car rate when I'm traveling. And that was really my only reason, but now I'm getting newsletters and emails, and one of them talked about medications and memory loss, which is a very relevant thing as far as the publication. So I thought that was a very good thing in their publication. Wasn't biased or anything, even though they're strongly associated with insurance companies. But a lot of people don't realize that a lot of medications that are prescribed very, very commonly are associated with worsening memory and increased risk of dementia. And some of them include anti-anxiety medications, such as Xanax, Klonopin, Ativan, Restoril, anti-seizure medications. People have seizures, it's hard to get off them, but there is a risk of dementia. Tricyclic antidepressants, which are somewhat of the older classes of Elavil, Norepin, Tofranil, but nevertheless are still widely used. Of course, narcotic painkillers. If you're numbing your mind, dumbing your mind to pain, you're also, potentially knocking off different neurons involved in memory as well. Sleep aids are huge. A lot of people have trouble with sleep and they want a quick fix. TV advertisement all the time, things like Sonata, Ambien, Lunesta are associated with amnesia and worsening risk of dementia. All of these medications are not only associated with dementia, but they're very difficult to get off. You cannot stop them cold turkey. And I repeat, if you are on these medications, you cannot stop these medications cold turkey. There can be severe side effects. It has to be done hopefully under the direction of a licensed healthcare provider, i.e. MD or psychiatrist that has prescribed these and taken people off, but it's not something to do without, again, a supervision. So please, this is by no means me telling anybody to stop these medications, but I am suggesting that you don't start them without, again, a discussion on how might you get off of them. Other medications, such as incontinence drugs, are associated with increasing risk of dementia. Antihistamines, sleep aids, just such as even Benadryl, potentially are. So, there are alternatives to these medications in a lot of instances, but they have been just prescribed so easy to get people a quick fix. And again, to get people off these medications can take years. A lot of times when people can't sleep, it's because they go to sleep, but then they wake up and they're rehashing problems or stressors in their life and are working out problems and rehashing problems or rehashing stressors in their life. And it becomes a vicious cycle, and you think of one bad thing and then another, and there tends to be a lot of what ifs. So potential bad future events can cause issues, or how would you settle or solve a current problem, and it gets people thinking, and then they can't go to sleep. The reality of it is you can't solve much in the middle of the night, so thinking about it doesn't really solve anything. I have a couple funny anecdotal things that I came up with a tofu egg sandwich one night but I was more dreaming about it. It wasn't like I couldn't sleep. And sometimes if I have trouble sleeping or my mind starts to wander, I'll try to think about something like, what am I going to talk about for the podcast? And the next thing you know, I'm bored to death and I go to sleep. But one of the things I thought about is that, again, most of the time it's negative things that keep people up at night. And one thing leads to another. What happens if you replace them with positive things, or actually try to recount memories of good things? And think about good things that have happened over the years in great detail. Often that really works, helping people to go to sleep. At least it's much more pleasant than thinking about bad things that you really can't fix in the middle of the night anyway. When we look at some of the watches, and most of the time they track sleep with movement, and so if the watch is not on tight, it might be a problem, or if you didn't wear the watch. But sometimes people don't think they sleep, but they actually do sleep. So you may be resting in a somewhat light sleep or semi-conscious state, and actually sleeping more than you really do think that you're sleeping. And sometimes the fear of not sleeping actually keeps people awake as well, because I need sleep, and there's so much data out there to suggest if we don't get good sleep, we're going to die. So the pressure is for people to get sleep. just note that if you're lying there comfortable and resting and thinking about pleasant things, it's probably going to be all right. So give the good thought process a chance, and if not, think about something really boring, and that might work as well. And of course, sleep hygiene is a real thing. Blue light, watching scary TV shows in bed while you're trying to go to sleep, or being really ramped up. Sometimes when people exercise late, it's very difficult. So certainly, starting to tone the lights down. Some people even use red lights to start to get rid of some of the blue lights in their TV areas. And certainly don't, use your iPad to fall asleep with. That's probably not going to be helpful. Or get up and eat, or get up and walk around. Again, note that you're relaxing and take comfort in that, and those things may help, and certainly don't have the side effects of these dementia-causing sleeping aids. Of course, what would a podcast be if I didn't mention Ozempic? But, again, as the drug's been out for longer periods of time, there's a couple more things coming up with them, and one is sarcopenia, or loss of muscle and bone mass. It's been noted to be more significant than people that just lose weight by caloric restriction. The mechanism of how these medications work and cause muscle mass loss is not exactly known at this point. However, it may have something to do with the rapidity of weight loss, so people tend to drop weight quicker. And when you're dropping weight quicker and there's a shift in energy, protein is broken down, muscular protein is broken down, and there is a subsequent loss of muscle. Of course, there's also the what we've talked about before, is that people lose muscle mass since they've been, since age 30, you start to lose muscle mass and you gain fat mass. And when you take the fat mass off, you finally realize how much muscle mass you've lost over time. But it does seem to be accelerated in people that take these medications. And this is significant because when you lose muscle mass, you lose mitochondria. And the root of a lot of diseases are based in loss of muscle mass and loss of mitochondria and dysfunctional mitochondria. 80 to 85% of the glucose is taken up by skeletal muscles. So you're having muscles really matters with regard to the energy that you take or the food that you intake. So metabolism of fat and glucose strongly depends on how much muscle mass that you actually have. The skeletal muscle mitochondria act like little engines that are able to oxidize the glucose and turn it into energy. And that's called ATP. This mechanism requires oxygen so that if you're sprinting, you can't burn carbohydrates. You burn the ATP that you have. And if you're running or training at a lower heart rate, you do burn some fat. But if your heart rate is more elevated, then you're burning carbohydrate. And in people with impaired mitochondria, they tend to burn a lot more carbohydrate than they oxidize fat. So you have this nasty combination of decreased muscle mass, decreased dysfunctional mitochondria, and increased caloric intake. So what ultimately happens is that the mitochondria can't effectively process all the glucose and all the energy, or all the glucose and fat that's available. And especially when it comes to glucose, then the body shifts to a different kind of metabolic process, kind of a generator backup mode, where the metabolites are kind of spit back out into the fluid of the cells called the cytoplasm, where this cytosolic fermentation occurs. When that occurs, lactate is produced. And everybody knows when, you're running and hard and your muscles burn, people say, well, I've got a buildup of lactic acid. Well, that starts to occur on a regular basis in people that have dysfunctional mitochondria. It also occurs in people that are exercising. But what's different is that lactate doesn't always have to be the enemy. Your brain can use it, different parts of your body can use it, and it can actually be recycled in people that are trained. So people that are endurance athletes can actually use their lactate. The better trained you are, the more you can recycle it and use it as it's produced. Of course, the more people with less mitochondria exercise, the more that their bodies can start to learn to use this lactic acid and not generate so much acid, which then becomes a source of inflammation, which then leads to problems like we talked about earlier with inflammation. So there's no medicine that you can take to learn to shuttle lactate back and forth between the mitochondria and the cell, or between cells, or to transport it to other parts of the body to use. It has to be a trained thing, and that is through activity, walking, prolonged times, endurance activities. The other interesting aspect of this is when you hear people say, don't eat sugar, sugar feeds cancer. Well, cancer cells kind of act like dysfunctional mitochondria, or their mitochondria act dysfunctional and they can't produce it. They take up glucose, but they end up producing a lot of lactate. And in individuals that are in poor shape to start with, they can't utilize the lactate, and it actually starts to become more inflammatory and is associated with increased risk of metastasis in people that have cancer. So again, good news. One way to decrease risk of cancer recurrence and metastasis is to exercise, keep your mitochondria and your muscles functioning properly so that you can utilize lactate and utilize these buffer systems. If you think about blue zone individuals, they have a sense of purpose, a community, which will lower stress levels. They have a more positive outlook on life. They probably sleep better. They're walking. A lot of them live in hilly areas, so their mitochondria and their muscle mass stays good. So you can understand why Lp(a) is probably not that big a deal if the rest of your life is pretty healthy. So again, leave the hand grenades in the closet. Instead of having the attitude of, this day went to hell in a handbasket, perhaps think about what went right today and all the other things that went right. Could help change your total outlook on things, decrease your inflammation, help you sleep at night. Certainly keeping your muscle mass is as important as eating a plant-based diet. I didn't mention yet, but increasing or eating a meat-based diet increases inflammation. Meat acts or helps our gut to select for a certain bacteria that is very pro-inflammatory, so eating a plant-based diet also decreases inflammation in the body. There have been associated decreased levels in target of rapamycin, which is also associated with cancer and increased metastasis. So changing your diet, normalizing your body mass index, increase your muscle, so looking at body composition is very important to maintaining good metabolic health, which takes care of all the rest, and you don't have to worry about all those little numbers and pills to try to treat those numbers. I consider myself a very good allopathic physician dedicated to the practice of medicine, but I can't be more disenfranchised or disappointed with how the practice of medicine is going. With, grab a pill, grab a procedure, don't take time to talk to people, don't let them become engaged, don't empower people to help themselves, and it's very, very disappointing. Our practice is dedicated to treating people the way we would like to be treated and how our family actually lives. We're active, we lift weights, we run, we walk, we're active on a daily basis, and we eat a plant-based diet with very little processing. So we walk the walk, and probably I have not had my Lp(a) checked. I have no desire to, don't care what it is. Probably it is elevated, but it's not going to change what I do to try to decrease my risk factors on a day-to-day basis. And you might be surprised of all the good memories you can start to come up with when you start to think about how far back can you remember the good things that happened in your life. And the next thing you know, you start to remember more and more details, and it becomes more and more pleasant. And, lying awake for a little bit of time starts to become a more peaceful experience. So I encourage you to give it a try. Again, keep the exercise up. If you want to know more about our practice and how we can help you navigate through some of this allopathic nightmare, follow your labs, follow this and that, versus just live a healthy lifestyle, please contact me. You can email me at Jami, Jami, at drdulaney.com. Go to the website, drdulaney.com, and look to see what we have. There's multiple opportunities for limited membership, consultative type memberships, and full memberships. So see what we have to offer. We'd love to help you navigate through any healthcare issues that you might have so that you can live the healthiest life well into your 80s and 90s independently, smiling all the way. Thanks for listening.